Welcome back to a special edition of the Young Turks. We are not in our studio, as far as I believe, correct?
I don't think so.
This isn't Los Angeles.
I mean, unless I've been completely misled about the entire location of where we are.
Blindfolded you and just took you to LA.
I've been rendered to LA.
So, not a bad way to be rendered. So we are in the beautiful London YouTube space. So thank you to the YouTube space in London for giving us this space to film out of. Owen Jones is joining me here. We are delighted. So, author of Chavs and the Establishment, popular journalist for The Guardian, so I'm sure you checked that out, formerly of The Independent, and my favourite title of them all, previously labelled a brain jackal by Fox News The 5. Please tell me where that came from.
Oh my word. So I wrote this piece going, about Obama's drone programme, bombing Pakistan, killing innocent civilians, and I said, whoever's in charge of the United States, there's a kind of systemic problem there with US foreign policy, we need to take it on. And I just woke up the next morning, I had these really angry tweets from Alabama calling me a filthy, dirty communist. And I thought, harsh, but what has happened? It turned out 5 on 5 on Fox News. They spent about 10 minutes just ridiculing me, calling me a brain jackal, amongst other things. I Googled, by the way, jackals don't even brain. I know Fox News.
You're telling me Fox News said something that was untrue? There is no way.
For their factual accuracy. And they called me a jerk and a 5th grader, which I thought was harsh. For about 10 minutes. Brutal.
Oh my god.
Brutal. It was like I sent that clip to people and people genuinely thought it was satire.
Yeah.
They thought that's not Fox News, and that's like that's a satirical caricature of Fox News.
They will be shocked if they went to the US. This is one thing I talk about whenever anyone can listen to me. It's just, there is such a thing as having a voice and putting your bias across, but there is no form of in-between media in the United States. There is just completely opinionated, and that's it. That's the news that people will take as fact. So now everyone in the US, they'll be like, Owen Jones, the brain jackal, nice to meet you.
I'm going to get on a t-shirt.
Yeah,
I think my epitaph when I die, that'll be on my grave. I'm happy with it.
Well, that's all the validation that TYT fans need. They know if you're upsetting those at Fox News, then you're on the right path. So we have a lot to get to today. We're going to try and fit it in as much as possible. So we're going to talk about a lot of things from Donald Trump, of course.
Big fan. Love Donald Trump.
Get a lot of views, kind of get that British perspective on what's going on in the United States. Try to fit it in into much. And as much as I would like to keep you here all night, I don't think I can, because, according to this misconception of our TYT audience and our main host, Cenk, is that English and Scottish people cannot be in the same room for that long talking politics, or else we all go into the upside down and end up suffering the same fate as Barb. I guess in Stranger Things. It could happen. We might know.
Is that a fact?
I think that's why. I think that's what William Wallace was fighting for back then.
Yeah, we're going to go to a dystopian parallel universe. Let's avoid that if we can.
Let's avoid
Just because I've got a busy week ahead, and it's a real hassle to escape the upside down.
Clearly a Stranger Things fan. If you're not, you've got some problems. You need to check it out. All right, so the first topic to kick things off, right, as I've got here, it's the topic that unfortunately has covered every single mainstream headline. I actually had my own father stay up late to watch the second debate. As you know, my dad is involved in American politics, so I'm going to give him that nod. But not so much so that you stay up to 2 in the morning to watch the debate. And
that's commitment.
It's for the entertainment value, because it simply is a reality TV show at the moment with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So Donald Trump at the moment, of course, in typical Donald Trump fashion, saying things that are controversial, to say the least.
As understatements go. Yeah.
No, I'm going to try and get into a little bit later, which is genius PR for the fact that he keeps deflecting away from the generalities and the fact that he has never stated anything accurate in any policies going forward. But I wanted to first kick things off with a broader question. Is in the United Kingdom, from what you have gauged so far, what is the general consensus of what's going on in the United States? Is there a certain level of fear that Donald Trump could actually become president of the United States? And what do you think that would mean for citizens of the United Kingdom?
Well, do you know what? It's been a long year in politics. I've aged. I look at least 16 now. But I think when Donald Trump first announced he was going to stand, I think in Britain there was a sense of it was just a joke, which was mostly what it was in the United States. It was this bizarre kind of, basically a PR stunt by a kind of reality TV star who just wanted a bit of attention. The idea he would ever come in any way close to the nuclear codes of the last superpower on Earth just seemed like a far-fetched idea. And it just stopped being funny at some point. I think towards the end of last year, it went from kind of bemused, kind of astonishment to genuine horror.
That person, that repeats a joke and then really 5 or 6 times, you're like, that's not.
Well, do you remember? George W. Bush when he was in charge, and at the time everyone thought he was this clownish kind of embarrassment, and he looks like this kind of model of respectability and intellect in comparison to this man. So it's quite some doing. I think it's just that I think people are aware in the United States, and I think we can't be smug about this in Britain anymore, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But there was this sense of how can someone so demagogic, so dishonest, so misogynistic, so racist, using the sort of language that about Muslims that in Europe was used against Jews in the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1930s, you can easily find, I'm sure, politicians saying we're going to stop any Jews entering the borders of this country. That's how he describes Muslims.
Yeah.
I think it's just because the United States actually, under George W. Bush, reputation it got a big hit.
Yeah.
Not least because of the calamity of the Iraq War and all the aftermath. Barack Obama. Now, people like me are very critical of his administration, but there's no question it changed the reputation of the United States.
Yeah.
It's astonishing to go from someone like him in most people's minds to a demagogue who is so deceitful and so stirring up this intense hatred that I think people are just find it beyond any description. It's not the United States that people actually really, I think, have been forced to confront. In the United States, the political elite hasn't confronted it either. They're responsible for the emergence of Donald Trump in the first place, so I don't think it's just a European thing.
Yeah.
But I think it is a sense of... But I mean, the point is, I think, is that this is something happening all over the Western world. The growth of xenophobic right-wing nationalism as people with massive economic insecurities that politicians of all persuasions have failed to address. So that's why, even though people look at Donald Trump and go, America, WTF, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Consider your life choices. At the same time, I think we need a bit more humility given the state of Europe at the moment.
Yeah, and it's because, from what I believe, it's because you have a more glorified version of it who's going to say things that you just don't believe any human being would come forward and say, as of the recent example which we have said, which has recently been described as locker room talk by those on the right. But I don't want to get into the logistics of Donald Trump. I want to go and capitalize on what you just said, which was one of the talking points, is fear in politics, right? So I feel fear has always been something that has been prominent and been used as a tactical mechanism in order to get your point across. Specifically talking about the recent example with Brexit and tying that back to Donald Trump with these nationalistic views that are often wrapped in patriotism, but they play on fear of immigration, fear of people taking their jobs, fear of attack. Do you see how much can you see the connections between both? Between what Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson were playing on here comparison to what Donald Trump has been playing on in the US?
Very striking. I mean, there's no coincidence. Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP, the cheerleader, and he's this guy, he's been in, he's this classic example. He's a former, broker in the financial sector that caused the crisis, not him personally, but that sector did. Privately educated, went to a posh school, and then poses as this anti-establishment guy, the champion of the working man who's been screwed over by a liberal elite which wants to destroy their way of life with immigration. So that's a very striking comparison. He's now obviously giving advice to his good friend Donald Trump. So the connection could not be stronger. But I think what happened in the referendum is we had a referendum supposedly on membership of the European Union. A lot of people in the United States might go, well, that's a fair enough discussion. It was, we should have had a referendum. But it wasn't really a referendum on that, it was a referendum about immigration. And what happened all the way through is politicians, rich, privileged politicians like Boris Johnson, who went to Eton, the most exclusive public school in Britain, where the royal family go and all the rest, and they stirred up bigotry and xenophobia and racism. Boris Johnson said about Barack Obama that it was his half Kenyan heritage that had led to anti-British resentment, and that's why he wanted Britain to remain members of the European Union. You got an official campaign that portrayed immigrants as rapists, murderers. I was going to say,
sounds similar to the guy that's got very similar hairstyles.
It's
catastrophic.
It is striking, the resemblance, and Turkish criminals were going to swamp the country. Nigel Farage stood in front of a poster of refugees fleeing violence with breaking point on it. It was a terrifying moment in British politics, and the danger is when Britain voted to leave, I think then what happened is it gave legitimacy to that. We saw a massive increase in hate crimes in this country. Lots of people I know were attacked, abused, accosted in the streets. I've been inundated with examples because they thought, well, if Boris Johnson, who's now Foreign Secretary of Britain, which is humiliating for our country because he's a clown, but they felt, well, he's saying it's legitimised. So they felt they had the mandate to go out and abuse people. But the reason it's similar is, I grew up in Stockport. Now, that's a town in northern England, which voted narrowly to remain in the European Union. But where I grew up, it didn't, because it was the posh suburbs that voted to stay. In Britain, it was working class people overall who voted to leave the European Union. There are lots of problems where I grew up, but not many immigrants.
Yeah.
A lack of housing because governments won't build them, a lack of secure jobs because they've been destroyed in our economy, living standards stagnating or falling, public services under strain because governments won't invest in them. Just like many of the economic insecurities in the United States, where wages have stagnated for working class Americans and middle class Americans for a generation or more. But the problem is people like me haven't come up with an actual answer to those problems. People on the left have failed to say, well, actually, this is government failure to invest, to defend your jobs and your living standards because they put profit ahead of people's needs and aspirations. And it was immigration, it just filled the vacuum. It became a way of explaining many of the problems that people had. Yeah. And that was stirred up cynically by politicians who didn't even believe half the stuff they were saying. And that's caused massive damage. But people like me have to take a bit of responsibility. And I think in America as well, people on the left also have to take responsibility. And both, it wasn't just the Republican administrations who fed, I mean, they legitimised a lot of the xenophobia and hatred for many, many years, Muslims, about women and all the rest. But also both wings, both parties, have left Americans feeling more insecure, poorer, more fearful about the future. It's the same in this country under both Labour and the Conservatives, and that's why both the United States and this country are in such a mess.
So you talked about a good point there that I was actually discussing off camera, behind the camera. It was interesting. Generalities is something that I hear, and I actually experience firsthand. So people are often looking at a way to place blame, and Donald Trump is an expert in pointing blame to those that is an easy target for everyone to assimilate to. So do you find that in the United Kingdom, as you just mentioned in Stockport, an example, so for instance, you can go to the United States and you can go to a very predominantly white area and you'll find that they will have a negative opinion towards black people, towards Hispanics, when a ridiculous amount of them have never actually encountered those in their neighborhood. But it's that the fact that a political figure is in a way validating their concerns, despite the fact that they may not have actually grown up in a culture that allows them to assimilate, allows them to understand, allows them to learn in a way that I would like to promote so that we can kind of bridge this gap and start to understand different cultures. Do you feel that in the United Kingdom it was a very similar idea that these areas that didn't actually experience some of this immigration were the ones that were voting to leave, that they wanted to just find a reason, an excuse to validate their own problems? To find out that if for instance, so let me clarify, so if I'm facing economic hardships, it's not to do with me. Rather than looking at ourselves and rather than looking at the problems that we face, which is often a reason why All Lives Matter protests form, rather than look at what's going on within the white community and things that we can do better, let's just deflect away. Let's deflect away from blame. Do you feel that that's a very similar problem with what happened in the UK?
Well, everywhere what we've got is an attempt to deflect blame away from the powerful to your neighbour down the street. Yeah. That you should be angry not with the people responsible for plunging you into economic disaster, the people who refuse to pay their taxes because they're too rich to pay taxes. You people watching this, that's a misjudging your audience. Yeah. They have to pay their taxes. The people who fail to build homes, who fail to defend public services and so on, those are the people who are responsible for the mess we're all in. But there's a constant redirecting of anger. Yeah, it's true in this country, areas with the least immigration often have the most anti-immigration sentiment. It was the places like London, Manchester, Birmingham with higher immigration that voted to stay in the European Union, let's not forget. But what we've seen, I think it's the politics of envy. And you often hear this. If I talk about the rich in Britain and say their wealth has more than doubled in the last few years, whilst working people have suffered the longest fall in wages in Britain since Queen Victoria sat on the throne in the 19th century, and I say they should pay a bit more money. And then people always go, politics of envy. Because if you stand up for the bottom 70%, they call you a class warrior. You stand up for the top 1%, they call you a moderate. But the truth is, it's the powerful who always promote the politics of envy. Because they say to unemployed people, they say to low-paid people low-paid workers, they say, don't be angry that your boss isn't paying you properly. Instead, you should be jealous of the unemployed welfare queen with massive television sets and living in mansions. And they say to people in the private sector whose pension's under attack or gone, and they say, don't be angry with your employer, you should be angry at the nurse, the teacher, the public sector worker. Why do they still have a pension when you don't? And people who can't get an affordable home because governments won't build them, or can't get a secure job because they've been ripped from our economy, and they're told, don't be angry at the powerful, be envious of the immigrant, the foreigner, getting the job or the home that should be yours. And what people are told in the United States and in Britain is don't be angry that you've been robbed, be angry your less deserving neighbour hasn't been robbed quite as much as you have. Yeah. And when people are angry with each other, they're not holding the powerful to account, like the plutocrats, like Donald Trump, who's responsible, obviously, for treating working Americans so badly, and instead people are too busy turning on Mexican immigrants and Muslims.
Yeah.
And nothing will ever change unless we change that.
And that kind of connects to something that you tweeted about that I thought was very interesting. Pulling up some tweets from your archive. But
Some howlers in there.
One you said that was really interesting is you said that those on the left are trying to go so far left that it's no longer politics, it's actually performance art. And I thought that was really interesting because do you feel that that's a response to those that are becoming so far right, that extremism is becoming such a normality that they feel caught that the only way they can actually appeal to the masses and appeal to an audience is if they actually indulge in it themselves, except on the other end of the spectrum?
I think the point about performance art is, I think, if you want to, if you're involved in politics in some way, whether you're a politician or an activist or whatever, then you want to change society. Otherwise, it's just saying words. You're just saying things.
You're a poet.
Exactly. You're letting off steam. You're making yourself feel better. You're getting things off your chest, but nothing is changing. And I think what I meant by that is, I think there's some people on the left, not most people, who are kind of rah, 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 look at how radical I am. I'm going to sound as radical as I am. That means using words that appeal to people who agree with me, but most people go, what are you talking about? I went to this talk yesterday. I did a talk. I travelled all over the place, and someone said, you didn't use capitalism in your speech. I was like, do I have to? I said we live in a society that puts profit ahead of people's needs. I guess, do you have to say these words? And I think people will sometimes want to show, look how radical I am. And for me, it's a case of, you've got to just start, I guess, where people are. That's not selling out. It's not diluting what you believe. But I think there's some people who prefer almost to become like a subculture. It's kind of, you kind of almost dress a certain way, you speak a certain way. If you don't abide by the rules, then you're out, you're a traitor. And it's said, that phrase, that the right look for converts and the left look for traitors. I think there's something in that sometimes, where people on the left are kind of looking for heretics. Kind of this person, we love kind of, on Twitter, just kind of putting, kind of Twitter poison in people's eyes. And, it's just kind of like, how can I take these other people down? Because they agree on 95% of what I believe, but that 5%, I'm gonna annihilate them for it.
And just as you mentioned traitor, it's a common word, the way that's been thrown around to us Bernie Sanders supporters who have, in a way, kind of defected across to Hillary Clinton in order to prevent the horror that would be Donald Trump in charge. But at the same token, Hillary Clinton has become more left in her approach. Is that a facade putting on in order to convert those voters? Because she has seen the movement that Bernie Sanders somewhat created, the way that the youthful voters were so positive in the way that everything that he stood for, that she in a way kind of played into that performance art and was actually manipulating how far left some of the audience was going in order to her benefit, to gather those middle voters.
You old cynic. Honestly. Look, I'm not, I think the thing is about Bernie Sanders is I genuinely think it's been, a bit of a car crash of a year in lots of ways, but actually that movement, because he always said it's not about him, it's about the movement. He was a surfer on a wave, and the wave for me was the really interesting bit, and it was one of the great hopes in the world, I think, this year, which was of millions of Americans galvanised by a movement that said we should put Main Street ahead of Wall Street, a United States for the 99%, not the 1%, that challenges corporate interests and all the rest. And you know what? You can judge a campaign like that by either he wins the candidacy and he succeeds, and if he doesn't, he's failed. And that's just not true. He's shifted the debate in America. He put issues on the agenda, and he forced Hillary Clinton into a position that she otherwise wouldn't be in politically. It's not good enough. Obviously I would vote Hillary Clinton as the lesser of two evils in the United States, so it's obviously America's decision. I don't think they like Brits generally sticking their nose in to tell them which way to vote. But nonetheless, I think, for me it was a case of that the movement that he represented it mustn't go anywhere. What needs to happen now is to defeat Donald Trump, but to hold Hillary Clinton and Democratic politicians to account and to shift them in a direction to get a real living wage, to deal with the absolute scandal in the United States of debt if you aspire to an education, to deal with the living standards declining for the next generation, good, proper, secure jobs, not poverty-paid jobs. And he's forced her to do some of the things that she wouldn't have done otherwise, and that's what movement should be about. I think he's transformed politics. So I think people in the Bernie Sanders movement should be very, very proud of themselves. They've been a beacon. I've got a lot of inspiration from them. I went to a rally in New York, and it was people spoke in just the same way as many of the people here. They've got the same aspirations, wants, fears, and all the rest. And I look at that movement and think it achieved a huge amount, and I think people should be very proud of it.
Well, to speak kind of on the personal note away from the politics, we had the privilege of having him in our studio a couple of
Bless
times.
him.
He is...
Love the bird.
And yeah, it's just like, it's your grandpa. He's always got a Weller's Original in his pocket. Like, he's always going to help you out. Like, he's just a really genuinely nice guy. And you like to believe that, obviously...
Did you sit on his knee?
I wish I did, but he wouldn't let me. He was in and out too quick. I think Cenk took up too much of his time. I had to send him on his way. But yeah, to go back to what you were talking about again, so I don't like to go forward and backtrack, but you say so many interesting things. I'm just trying to pick up parts that I want to come back on. So the rise in nativism and xenophobia that's going on, I think, as you mentioned, not just in the United States, not just in Britain, but it seems what's across Europe at the moment.
Everywhere.
Where do you see it going in Europe, specifically with the fact that Brexit's on the way, which we will get to, and I like your comment how it's not only a hard Brexit, it's a chaotic Brexit, and we want to get to discussion on that. But do you expect it to grow stronger, and what can we kind of do to try and counteract it at the moment?
Yeah, it's getting stronger, and unless the left gets its act together, then the future is very, very frightening for Europe. Look, Europe is history. I don't even need to go into it.
Yeah.
When it comes to, we've done the xenophobic right-wing populism thing.
Yeah.
It didn't pan out that well in the end last time, did it?
I think it did.
No.
Well.
And I'm not saying it's as bad as it was in the 30s, but there are very disturbing echoes of it.
Yeah.
And where the main target in the 30s was Jews, today it's mostly Muslims. There are anti-Semitic parties as well. So you've got, I don't know, in Austria, for the first time since the fall of Hitler, the far right are on the verge of taking the presidency. In France, the National Front is the most popular party. Mm-hmm. They're a far right, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim party. In Italy, you have far right movements as well. In Scandinavia, they're on the march.
Yeah.
The Swedish Democrats, for example, emerged from the neo-Nazi white supremacist movement. In some polls, they're top. So this is a problem everywhere. In Hungary at the moment, for example, you've got a right-wing authoritarian government which is attacking media freedoms and basic civil rights, and is attacking the rights of LGBT people, Romas, refugees. There's also a neo-Nazi party there which is attracting massive support. And this is, I think, the fear, because the financial crisis in 2008 was a catalyst. And that far right, since 2008, the financial crisis, it's just the same after 1929. People their lives get hard, they get more difficult, they struggle to pay bills more, they struggle to get affordable homes, and the far right can fill that vacuum. And my fear is, if nothing changes, then the xenophobic nationalism is the future of Europe. And where will that lead? Now, there are other examples where that hasn't happened. In Spain, half of young people out of work. Living standards obviously have had a massive hit, huge cuts, but they don't have a far-right party there. They have an anti-austerity, anti-cuts party called Podemos. So it's not, it's not inevitable, but unless people with my political persuasions get their act together, communicate in a way that resonates with people, then it's these lot who are going to take over the continent. Yeah. And if that happens, it said in 1914, before World War I, that the lamps are going out across Europe, we won't see them lit in our lifetime, and my worry is the lamps are starting to flicker, certainly one by one, and Europe has to learn. It's done this before. We've got to learn the lessons of our past, that when we have economic problems, if we start turning on minorities, if we start indulging in right-wing nationalism, then we will threaten the very underlying principles of what Europe should be about. So it's pretty chilling. It'll be fine though in the end.
Yeah, I did. I just felt like
the film.
I felt like my head was just slowly going down. I was just starting. I was going to play some soppy music.
We're going to end not by rocking the field position. We're going to be cheerful.
You're going to be cheerful. So a cheerful point to take to kind of go forward with this. You mentioned there that we need to start vocalizing and start being more prominent and start pushing it for the left to do better and to start to try and work towards a greater goal. How much do you feel that there is a power of the people that are standing for these minorities, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, which is prominent in the United States? I do a lot of research and analysis going into to make sure that these videos are pushed out on our channel, on our Facebook, to promote this. You yourself have done a video recently, Black Lives Matter movement in the United Kingdom. I was walking down the street there and I saw actual flyers on the bus terminal documenting Black Lives Matter in the United Kingdom. It was great. I've looked into it a lot more. So how important are movements such as that to go along with the strides we need to make in the political system and on the left to help push forward for those voices that maybe are perhaps oppressed that need to be spoken out for, such as that in the United Kingdom, and moving it across from the US to the United Kingdom, to Europe, and showcasing that it's not just a problem that is specific to the US, but worldwide.
No. Well, it's absolutely critical. Look, the way we get change isn't by the goodwill and generosity of the powerful.
Yeah.
Women didn't get the vote because powerful people woke up one day and went, I'm feeling really generous, I'm going to give women the vote just for a laugh.
Yeah.
People had to struggle. And you think of the United States, suffragettes, for example, these days, we laud suffragettes, don't we? They're like secular saints. But in the United States and in Britain, they were hated. Yeah. They were terrorists, they were anarchists. In Britain, they were dragged from protests, thrown in prison cells, they had tubes forced down their noses and force-fed. And, it's the same in the United States with the civil rights movement. These were people who confronted some of the worst injustices in United States history, the systematic oppression of African Americans, the consequences endured to this very day. But they marched and they struggled and they were met with violence and persecution, but they won in huge strides in the end. And you look at Black Lives Matter, and they're standing in that tradition. They're trying to finish the unfinished business of the fact that we have mass incarceration of African Americans, that you have police officers who murder black people on the streets of the United States in 2016. And here in Britain, we also have, if you like, black people are far more likely, people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, massively overrepresented in prisons. When it comes to stop and search, you call it frisk and what is it?
It's a stop and search. It's basically stop and frisk.
Stop and frisk. Yeah. So we call it stop and search. And according to official statistics, if you're black, you're less likely to actually take drugs.
Yeah.
But you're about 6 times more likely in London if you're black to be stopped and searched on suspicion. If you're found with cannabis or cocaine on you, you're far more likely to be charged than a white person found with drugs on you. And we've also had killings, of course, of black people either in custody or when they've been shot. So these are issues that have to be dealt with. Other broader issues as well, more likely to be unemployed, more likely to live in poverty. You're still more likely to be unemployed even if you have a university degree, for example, compared to a white person with a university degree. So we still live in a society riddled with racism, and our history shows us that the only way of challenging that isn't just by, being all polite, writing the odd strongly worded letter to a representative, stop this please, within your own time frame, whenever it's convenient, whenever you can get round to it, but by doing things which are often inconvenient to people, being loud, using peaceful civil disobedience, which is
kneeling during a national anthem.
Even a bit of kneeling mid-national anthem. And peaceful civil disobedience is a huge tradition in the United States and Britain. Yeah. Some of our rights and freedoms were won, most notably in the United States, but also here because of peaceful civil disobedience. So for me, it's a case of the way you get change is by people who are otherwise ignored, belittled, hated, using their collective power to force the powerful to concede. That's what Frederick Douglass.
Oh, yeah, right, you got it.
Yes. Yeah. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And that's the truth. That's how you get change, not by going, one day they'll just wake up and go, we're being really mean. We should do something about it. But instead by people forcing them to address injustice. And there's movements in Britain, as you've mentioned, and all over Europe, and we need their voices more than ever.
One question I'm actually not so familiar on recently is, has there been an opposition movements as we've seen in the United States? So once again, a video I did recently on Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, an experiment was carried out to kind of pit them two against each other. All Lives Matter often seen as this feel-good party. It's like, we need to be more united. We need to focus on everyone gathering together, when actually, when you look at it, whatever way you want to spin it, it's just a response. It's a response that has came about in order to maintain the silence of black voices in the United States, often skewed with statistics that are disproportionate, saying people going out about saying that they're actually more likely to be shot as a white person, when statistic doesn't agree with that, and the fact that more black people are shot when unarmed in comparison to white Americans. And it's often skewed and validated by certain videos from the right wing. Have you seen that sort of response in the United Kingdom to the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK? Has there been an All Lives Matter moving on this side of the pond that is to kind of keep and maintain that silence? Or are they called the Tories?
Otherwise known as the ruling party of Britain. Every time I tweet, and everyone knows the same in the United States, whenever I tweet anything or write anything or do a video about Black Lives Matter, the automatic response is All Lives Matter. And it is, I think, deeply beyond frustrating, because the point is obviously all human life matters. The point that is made is, look, one group, if you like, one community is facing systematic persecution, and that when a movement arises to say we need to address this fact, you know, whether it be disproportionate stop and search, overrepresentation in the justice system, poverty, unemployment, then others have a responsibility to listen to them. And it's not to go, you don't then try and dilute it by going, but what about all, you know, we've all got problems. You know, I mean, that's a way, it's, you know, it's known as whataboutery. You know, you know, if you say, for example, I don't know, if I say what's going on in Syria is terrible, look at all these people being killed. But what about this? It's just an attempt to deflect.
A sports personality said it very well recently. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he said it's simply gone into a family that suffered a loss through breast cancer and going, but what about this thing?
Exactly. Like, well, if I suddenly break my leg and then you go, well, I know someone else who's broken their leg, so I don't know why are you complaining about breaking your leg?
The comparisons go on.
It's like can we just focus on my leg for a minute? So I think that's obviously what we need to do, is deal with the fact that certain sections of humanity are disproportionately oppressed and face, you know, discrimination and prejudice. That we need to listen to their voices, which are underrepresented, and we all need to confront and deal with it. And that's not to say, you know, because then people go, well, there's lots of people who can't get home, and that's true. That when there's a disproportionate issue and people raise their voices, we should listen to them, we should address it. And we can then deal with other injustices as well. It's not you know, that's the only thing we're ever going to deal with ever again.
The funny thing about All Lives Matter movement, which I highlighted in the recent video, is that for what they are saying they stand for, which is a representation of all races, all ethnicities, is that where have they been in the recent Dakota Pipeline march, where those lives matter? Like, where have they been in the march for 15 to try and increase the minimum wage? Where have they been in immigration rights? In fact, why is All Lives Matter not being protested in any Donald Trump campaigns? Because he's not for all lives. He's against Hispanic lives and Muslim lives, according to his recent reports and everything he's been stating. So where are those lives? Where are those signs in those campaigns? It's very similar to what any proponent that we've seen in the United States. It's just a way to deflect away from systematic issues. It's just a way to deflect away from what... rather than taking a look at themselves, what am I doing right? Maybe perhaps I'm still staying true to stereotypes. Maybe perhaps I'm judging the whole entirety of a race based on a video I seen or someone I know down the street.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. When people say this, they don't actually care about these other injustices. For example, when I'll go, you know, if you talk about, I don't know, refugees in, you know, and what we need to deal with in terms of the problems, terrible injustices they face, people go, what about people in this country who are unemployed and homeless? And I'm afraid to say those people tend to be the least considerate when it actually comes. The only time they'll talk about homeless people or unemployed people is in order to deflect from issues to do with refugees. You know, I mean, generally they're more likely to be people saying unemployed people are lazy and should have support taken away from them. So it's convenient, you know, you pit people against each other. Similarly, when I talk about refugees, you'll get people saying, and I get this all the time as a gay man, they'll go, oh, well, what about the attitudes of some of these, of all, you know, they'll say all these refugees are bigoted and homophobic, and the only time they ever talk about LGBT rights is to have attack on refugees, so they don't have any interest in it. But that point about deflecting, you know, and I've heard this used before, it's this metaphor, you know, I'm not going to tidy my room because the rest of the world is a mess. You know, you'll never deal with any injustice. Because you can always go, well, what about that or that? And the people doing that, when they're deflecting to something else, they don't really care about that other issue. They're just trying to stop people focusing on something they do not want to address themselves. And it's cynical, it's shameful, because it's not trying to deal with any injustice at all. So rather than saying we need to deal with all injustice, they're actually saying we should deal with no injustice, because that's
how things are going to get done. We just sit back and let it pay its way.
It's worked well in the past.
Yeah, it has done.
Hasn't it? It's always been foolproof.
So, shifting gears, if I haven't riled you up enough already, it's time to rile you right up and shift gears to a topic which, often not, I'll see in the comment section, get the British guy on to talk about Brexit, and when I do come on about Brexit, get another British guy to come on and talk about Brexit, maybe a little bit more competent, maybe someone who's not Scottish and is just really upset, pissed off the fact that the majority of Scotland voted to stay, and once again, we're the little brother at the table who just is like, Did we ever
Hi.
see anybody else?
To be fair, we're in London. London,
Yeah, very true.
pulled its finger
Very
out
true.
also.
I actually made a comparison on the main show that many people liked when I talked about this, is that they were asking kind of what does it feel like to be Scottish when you are looking to try and put across this point. And often the comparison was it's like very similar to Bernie Sanders' campaign and trying to fight against a super delegate. It's like the super delegate is so influenced by other exterior points of view, the way Hillary Clinton, no matter what sort of momentum he put up against her, whilst the super delegates are still within her corner, you're really fighting a losing battle. Even if the majority of your country, upwards of 64%, vote to remain in the EU, whilst the bigger, badder brother still has that power. It's unfortunate. And you're not the bigger, badder brother. Just
I was going to say.
I'm not trying to put that on you. I'm not going to vent that.
I don't think anyone would call me a bigger or badder. Rarely had those terms to describe me, to be honest with you.
So we will go forward and we'll talk about your recent article, which I loved, where you mentioned that let's not call it hard Brexit, let's call it chaotic Brexit. So for those, we'll leave the link so you can read that. But for those that haven't read it yet, what does this mean?
Right, so Britain is leaving the European Union. That is going to happen because 52% voted to leave. Now, it doesn't sound like a massive majority, but that's democracy. You lose, and we lost. So we're out of there. But the issue now is what kind of Brexit? Well, on what terms do we leave? And what they're calling it at the moment is a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit. Now, just to kind of explain what that would mean, in the soft Brexit, we'd stay part of something called the single market. So that would mean we'd be part of the kind of the family of European nations where you can freely trade without tariffs or anything like that. But then you'd have to have freedom of movement. And one of the main reasons people lost is because they didn't want people to come into this country in the level that they were coming in. So that would still mean immigration on the same scale we have now.
Yeah.
So that's the argument you would argue. Some people would say, well, we can't have that. Yeah. The other is a hard Brexit, where we basically withdraw from the single market, and then we can put limits on freedom of movement. The problem with that one is you then trash your own economy. Because that would then lead to economic ruin. And the problem is the government have no clear idea what they're doing at all. They have no clear terms. But for me, I said, because I think language matters, and the right get this better than the left, hard Brexit sounds a bit like, yeah, they really mean it, kind of a bit macho, tough, and soft Brexit's all like, oh, namby-pamby, fluffy. And I argued we should instead say that the Tories are offering a chaotic Brexit. So at the moment now we're seeing, because Britain has a very weak negotiating position with Europe, the EU are like, well, I mean, yeah, we'll give you a deal, but I mean, it's not going to be great, is it? You've already you're out here.
Told us where to go.
We're not going to go have a great deal because then other people go, well, we'll just do the same thing then. Get all the perks without any of the minuses that people don't like. So now what they're doing is, and we're talking about, Britain will have to pay huge amounts of money, will lose huge amounts of money in the economy. Low-paid workers will get, and those are the people, low-paid workers are most likely to vote Brexit, that they'll get a huge financial hit. The pound has collapsed to the lowest level since 1985. And if you get a bad terms of Brexit, then loads of institutions, financial institutions, businesses, they'll just leave. So at the moment, they have no idea what they're doing, the government, but I think instead of saying this is a hard Brexit, because that, to a lot of people who voted, that just sounds like, yeah, they mean it. I'm going to get what we want.
Sounds like they still know what they're doing, which is often the misconception with Tories.
But they don't know what they're doing at all.
It's like you just often believe that you might not like them, very similar to most politicians, you might not like them, but you almost feel a sense of contempt that they are actually understanding of the process is what they're going through, that they might know where they're going to go.
Well, people think often about the Conservatives, same with the Republicans, that we don't like them, they're nasty.
They know how to manage money.
Exactly, they're competent. They stand up for the rich, but they're competent. And that's not looking great for the government at the moment. So what they need to do is come under a huge amount of pressure, and finally we're starting to see it. At first it just looked like they could do what they wanted, start killing the firstborn and get away with it. But now they're not, so it's all about putting pressure on them. This is chaotic Brexit. It threatens the economy, the living standards, the security of this country, which is not great.
So how do you see, by the way, with the call to the current leaks again, I'm sure people in the UIT audience in the United States have seen this. It's estimated 66 billion of a loss. That's if you can make it back.
You got it down the sofa.
You know how you can make it back? By, according to rumours, removing £800 a month from the lowest income jobs. That sounds like a very similar way to what they would try to plan in order to make that money back. How do you see Britain specifically under Theresa May, reacted to this?
Well, I think it's not really hit people, the consequences, to be honest, of what's going to happen. We're in a kind of phony war.
Yeah.
People have voted to leave. Okay, things like the pound have gone down, and a lot of financial institutions and so on are getting a bit nervous. But the reality hasn't hit people, and I think the fear I have is many of the people who voted to leave are the ones who are going to suffer the most, and unless people who don't want a chaotic Brexit, but actually want a Brexit that protects people, which puts the economy first, which means having access to the single market above all else, to protect our jobs in our industries that would face ruin. Unless we get our act together with a clear message, my fear is people's lives will get harder and people just get ever angrier with immigration still. They'll go, hang on a minute, we were promised, we voted to Brexit, we were told our lives would get easier, they'll won't notice any difference in terms of immigrants unless the economy collapses and everyone flees, and so they'll get ever angrier with, I think, the wrong targets.
Yeah.
So we've got to hold the government to account. The government now, in terms of their Brexit negotiations, we've got to say, hang on a minute, if your living standards are going to be hit, your security is going to be hit, then we've got to say that they have failed. Because at the moment the Tories seem to be very dominant in this country. They're way ahead in the opinion polls, partly because the opposition parties had this massive internal crisis. So we've got to hold them to account, and I think that's starting to happen now.
Yeah.
That this has to be now a Brexit which is about standing up for working class Britons who are going to suffer the most, and it's the people who voted for Brexit in the first place because their lives were hard and tough.
Yeah.
So it would be an absolute farce if the people who voted out of anger and frustration, justifiable because of how difficult their lives were, their lives get even harder still. That would suck.
To go to a basketball term, you threw me the alley and I'm going to oop it, which means you just kind of set it up and I'm going to go for it. So you
I don't understand that, but fine.
You mentioned the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. What do you see the direction here? Do you see them as a solution in order to try and enlighten the general public as to what the Tories have been putting forward, the fact that they've not been able to really understand the consequences of what they've been pushing at this point? And are you confident in the way that they will be able to move forward? You mentioned the turmoil within the camp. How do you see that solution coming to fruition in order to help and kind of give everyone this general boost of confidence and moving in the right direction?
I was just going to close my eyes and cross my fingers and hope everything just pans out.
I was actually praying that you were going to give an answer like that. I don't know why I was setting up with such optimism. I was like, what can happen here? You're like, we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, it's like the Star Wars films. Things look really bad for a while, but then in the end, it's fine. No, it will be. I think the problem with Labour, Labour's had its ups and downs, a lot of downs actually. Yes. To be honest, basically what happened is Jeremy Corbyn, who stood against the old party establishment, no one expected he'd win. It seemed more likely an asteroid hitting Earth. Yeah. Would seem more likely than him becoming Labour leader, and he didn't expect to win, and inevitably then, if you don't expect to win, then you make some mistakes, a lot of mistakes which did cut through to the general electorate. He also got the media throwing everything at him, and his own members of parliament, because we have a parliamentary democracy, most of them didn't want him to be leader, and some of them undermined him from the very beginning. What happened after Brexit was everyone, basically, the entire political elite went, and everyone just felt sick and started running around. I did as well. We all did that.
Just running around.
Everyone's like, and what happened was a lot of MPs blamed Jeremy Corbyn as they thought, because they said he wasn't making the case enough for Britain to remain, and he was partly responsible. Now, actually, most Labour voters voted to stay in the European Union. Actually, a considerable majority did. But people felt there'd be an early election and Labour would get wiped out, so they moved then. A lot of them who moved just didn't like his politics. They're wedded to the old form of right-wing Blair-style politics. Yeah. A lot of them just were worried they were going to lose a general election very badly. Yeah. But basically, there was a vote of no confidence. It triggered another contest, and he just won the contest last year to be Labour leader by a huge majority. Went through that for another few months. He just won again. Yeah. Complete waste of time, the whole thing. But what it did is because Labour had this massive public infighting, so all the focus, and this is why I was angry, despite my calm. But this is why I was angry, because all the focus should have been on the Conservatives. Yeah. the Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron forced to resign after a referendum which plunged the country into its worst crisis since 1945. That's not a time then for the opposition to go, oh no, forget that. Yeah. No, we'll just start punching each other in public for 3 months.
It's so similar, the way, when you put it that way, just so similar to what we see with the inner party conflict with the Democratic Party as well in the United States, is whether a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters and supporters that have been advocates for the Democratic Party for years, or an internal conflict as well, whether or not they're betraying Bernie Sanders by voicing their concerns over Donald Trump. And even if they do perhaps go to Hillary Clinton and they want to vote in order to prevent the inevitable, they're often seen as traitors from Bernie Sanders. So do you see similarities between that inner conflict from what we see in the United States? And also, I know you've actually been, as much as you are a supporter for Jeremy Corbyn, you've criticised him in the past. What's the response been when you often criticise someone that you're supposed to pledge your allegiance to no matter what?
Really zen, calm, mild-mannered responses. Yeah, I mean...
Blairite, I imagine, was called in there.
Right-wing sellout, that was just my mum as well. No, I think it is a febrile time, and I think because, look, Jeremy Corbyn comes under huge amounts of attack from the mainstream media, who don't like his politics, and from the Parliamentary Labour Party, a lot of people go, look, Owen, you're one of the only left-wing journalists in the mainstream. You have a responsibility to just uncritically support him and be a cheerleader. But I'm afraid that's not what I do or who I am. Because my interest is, I'm an activist, I want the left to succeed. And that means addressing massive challenges that exist. So I always say, look, the coup against him that failed was a disgrace, because we should have been focusing on the Conservatives. And that's caused Labour's polling to collapse to very bad levels. So we should have been, not had that infighting. Equally, a lot of the MPs undermined him, which is outrageous, and the media have attacked him in a disgraceful way. But they've made lots of mistakes, and that's because they didn't expect to win. And the problem is, we're not going to get rid of the media. They're not going to stop being kind of right-wing zealots who oppose...
It would be a great world if they could.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen though, is it? For a while anyway. I mean, in terms of having a more reasoned and, common sense media that's just about information rather than, a press which is basically political lobbyists. I think, we've got the media we've got. And what the leadership of the Labour Party have to do is deal with lots of problems they have, like a media strategy. And they've got better at that, but they still have a while to go. Like having clear messages you repeat over and over again. Like having a clear vision. Because if you don't define yourself, you're defined by your opponents. And they've defined them in a terrible way as extremists and all the rest, the way people who challenge the status quo and injustice always are. And it's things like, older people who are most likely to vote are the least likely to support Labour. We've got to address that. We've got to address issues like, well, Labour have lost, as you know, in your home nation Scotland completely. They've almost been wiped out there as their heartland for decades. Whether it be, we've got increasing numbers of self-employed people. What does Labour say to them? How do they express their economic vision in a way people can understand? Because at the moment that's not there. And the reason it's so critical, and the reason I will speak out, even if sometimes it makes me unpopular amongst some of the people who I guess would normally cheer me on the most, is because if we screw this up, we can't just go in and we'll just do it again next time. It'll be fine. We'll just have a second go. It doesn't work like that. And with right-wing xenophobic populism on the march, it's not just like the old days where you're stuck with the Tories. You're now stuck with xenophobic nationalism, which is triumphant, and that will sweep us all away, and that will be devastating for our future. So if there was an early general election in this country at the moment, the danger is Labour under the leadership would get decimated, the left would be blamed, and then it would be very difficult. Whenever for the next few years, I say anything vaguely left-wing, people go, back to the bad old days of Jeremy Corbyn, he got defeated in that general election. So for me, I'm kind of desperate for it to work. So the criticisms I come up with are starting from, I want them to succeed, not wanting them to fail. And, it's not me saying, these are the problems that have to be addressed. That will be their end. It will be not addressing the problems. So they've got to address the problems. And on the left, we've got to learn we're not a cult, we're a movement. And that means holding leaders to account. It means, and I might say things which are wrong, and I do. I'm not saying otherwise, but I'm just saying what I think they need to do. They can take it or leave it, obviously. But at the moment, they're in a very, very difficult position. and they've got to do a lot of work in a very difficult environment, all the odds stacked against them to succeed. But if they don't succeed, we're going to pay a big, big price, and I don't want to pay that price.
No one does.
No.
No one does. But so to go off of what you said as well, like so with the inner squad conflicts in Labour and a lack of confidence, I like to call it that way. I don't know, sports references kind of get out of my head. Let's move towards Scotland for a second. So there's always been rumours ever since the referendum had passed, and Scotland was the only nation to never vote for their own independence. Not to go into that, we'll move into now almost that gaping wound was rubbed with salt, vinegar and some peroxide when they voted a majority to stay in Europe. If there is to be another referendum, do you see Scotland wanting to leave the United Kingdom? And do you believe that this will be a repercussion of Brexit, and Brexit will in fact be the dismantling of the UK from what we know it to be?
Well, Brexit makes it much more likely Scotland will leave. Of course it will. I mean, look, Scotland's already kind of halfway out the door. Yeah. Let's be honest. It's not like there's this great loving relationship. It's a case of I like it. It's pretty emotional, pretty spiritual, I'd say. Yeah, no, it's almost like a relationship where someone's gone, I don't know, this is working, Yeah. I'll see how it goes, but I'm not sure. So that is kind of England. That is Scotland. The rest of the country, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very true.
It's kind of I'm not ready to move out quite yet and get a separate flat, but I might stop packing my bags just on the off chance.
Move the order. We'll
exactly. Those are my DVDs, by the way, and I will be taking those DVDs. Yes, obviously Scotland is decoupled a lot from the rest of the country politically. Scotland doesn't vote for the Conservatives. Yeah. Most people don't in Scotland. The Tories have had a bit of resurgence there, but they're still, much less popular than they are in England in particular. So a lot of people in Scotland go, hang on a minute, we always vote against them, but we still get stuck with the Conservative government. And that's one of the reasons. And also things like UKIP and, that kind of, the UKIP, the xenophobic hard right party, have never caught on in Scotland in the way they have in England and Wales. And then when, obviously England and Wales voted to leave the European Union. They're not the big cities, London, Manchester, they didn't vote to leave. But they still went, hang on a minute, we're getting all this stuff we don't want. Yeah. We're being dragged out of the European Union. We're stuck with Tory governments. This is ridiculous. We don't want any of this. Stop it. Why should I stay with you? It's almost like a relationship. I'm trying to think if I can drag this metaphor out. Where they've moved in this aggressive.
Most Scottish relationships, anyway.
They've moved in this. Someone's moved in this aggressive neighbour's just throwing stuff around. It's like, I don't want this person living with this. He keeps trashing everything. He's anyway, and it is kind of something like that. Kind of make it work, please. But the difficulty is at the moment, if Scotland leaves. Because the oil prices have collapsed, so some would argue the economic case isn't there. So I think at the moment, not tragically, the reality is that lots of people in Scotland, the reason there still isn't probably a definite majority is some people want to leave but don't think that economically it would work. So that's what has to change.
So it's almost a fear of the unknown, opposite from what we've been talking about.
Exactly.
Values. Yeah.
But I think, if now in the opinion polls there's a kind of clear lead for independence for a long time, then there'll be another referendum. Yeah. But my English uncle lives in Edinburgh and he voted for independence last time. So it kind of does, it's not a kind of brave heart, as blood and soil nationalism. It's not that. It's about people who feel this isn't a society that works. Yeah. We're kind of trapped in something.
Control of their own government.
Exactly, and then we'll build a different sort of society. Yeah. And I suppose that's whether you agree with independence or not, that's what's driving it, and that Brexit makes it more likely.
So, but in part with that as well, as Northern Ireland often felt disgruntled as well with that. So, with Scotland potentially leading the charge and leaving the United Kingdom, could you potentially see others following suit in the dismantling of the United Kingdom with the 4 nations going down to maybe 3-2?
Well, Northern Ireland, voted to stay in the European Union as well. And it kind of puts a lot of pressure on their peace deal, because what we have as part of it is, for example, freedom of movement between Britain and Ireland, so people can freely move across the borders. And if you're in Northern Ireland, you can be a citizen of both Ireland and the United Kingdom. But if we leave the European Union, Ireland stays in, obviously, but Northern Ireland is out. So then there'd be an open border, in theory. So then EU people from the EU would just go to Ireland and then just march over the border in the United Kingdom. So that puts strain, because then if they start fortifying the border, then that would completely undermine the peace process.
Or they could build a wall.
Build a wall! Huge! Huge!
See how that works.
We're not doing that.
No.
And well, they're talking now about having Irish airports, and so we'll have to do the job for Britain instead, which I'm sure Ireland's delighted with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it puts. I mean, you know what? I think, you know, there's a big chance United Ireland will happen one day.
Yeah.
But it does need a majority in the north. It isn't there yet at all. But, you know, the way things are going, who knows? Because, again, in Northern Ireland, they didn't want this, did they?
Yeah.
And a lot of them are like, what are you doing that for?
Yeah. So I feel like we've covered so much, a lot of great stuff, and I feel like it's been up and down, but I do want to end with some audience questions. All right, so we're going to end on some positive notes with some tweets. Audiences sent them in. We tweeted it out, asked them for your thoughts. The first one is in typical optimistic fashion. Why is a poor man's David Beckham interviewing someone who has the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk?
I've told my mum to stop sending these tweets. Will she listen though? Honestly, leave me alone. Jeez. It's harsh, but is it unfair? I mean, to be honest. I mean, you got David Beckham at least.
With his name being in the tweet, I'm delighted.
You've got what?
Bank clerks are successful.
Super. I mean, come on. I know what they're trying to say though. They're not trying to big up bank clerks. You do an excellent job. Thank you very much. Belittling hard-working bank clerks. I wouldn't drag bank clerks down to my level, to be honest.
Yeah.
They're far better dressed than me.
But that's
look how dapper you are. I just look. You know, that's this lost school child.
That's very mellow to the criticisms that I've faced, to be honest. I don't know if you resonate with that, but
you've got to get
mellow.
Someone who's regarded as one of the best looking footballers, a national icon. I just got what was it, charisma of a newt?
Yeah, no, charisma of a damp rag.
A damp rag. I've come across some exceptionally charismatic damp rags in my time. So.
But this one's actually a very good one. So this is from Samarkand, was at IAACM. We'll throw it up so you guys can see it. What lessons might the movements behind Corbyn and Sanders, respectively, have for each other?
Ooh,
I like that one.
That is
really
good.
Interesting.
I think Sanders was very good at communicating. Yeah. In terms of, you know, kind of, he had this great, I think he didn't have the charisma of a damp rag, he'd say that. You know, and he had this idea of reaching out to people who, you know, because this was the most successful socialist in American history, and it was in 2016. Who would have seen that coming?
Unbelievable.
Normally he'd get...
He's been fighting for the same cause for years.
Yes.
Ever since he started.
And it's funny because he's this, you know, septuagenarian, Jewish, self-described socialist from Vermont. Who did he particularly inspire? Younger people. Yeah. You know, 80 to 85% in some primaries of people under 30 were voting for him. I think his communication, a way he'd communicate in a very easy, accessible way. Yeah. You didn't have to read some, you know, political textbooks to understand what he's saying. Yeah. Clear messages he repeated over and over and over again. I think is a really good lesson. I learned a lot from that. And I think from here, what could he learn? Well, obviously, Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party. But I think what I would say, what could Bernie Sanders learn from here?
The accent.
Great accent.
Get like that with an accent.
Pretty good accent.
It's going to resonate pretty well with the US.
Well, I suppose actually one thing we've, I think, you know, managed to keep people mobilised and enthused. Yeah. Now that has to be, you know, the danger is here, and the danger in the United States was you just get rallies of people who are already convinced. But what about all the people who aren't? Most people don't turn up to rallies.
Yes.
So you've got to go out. You've got to get people who turn up. You've got them to go out and knock on doors and reach people and talk to them. Yeah. If you've got these enthused people, you've got to do something with them. So I think both of them need to do that.
For me, on this, to answer on Bernie Sanders, what I felt he could have done a little bit more, even though I still believe when you're fighting against an establishment candidate who notoriously, as we've seen with the leaked Democratic Committee documents, was fighting an uphill battle from the very start, media manipulation, everything going. I felt like he could have been a little bit more ruthless. And I know that's pretty harsh to say when it comes to politics. We talked about it earlier, kind of this performance art, if you're going to be so left in order to appeal to an audience. But Bernie Sanders started as far left as we can go. He is so left we can barely see but the cute grey-haired man to the left.
I think he's a moderate, common sense guy. I mean, who are the real extremists? I think the real extremists are the people who send people off to die in foreign wars, who build rich societies where millions of people live in poverty, where work doesn't pay, where education means being indebted. I think he was a moderate. They're the extremists.
But in the United States, again, having a 7-year kind of case study to build this from, it's often myself and our main host, Jake Hugo, will disagree on this, is that whilst he believes that, and an extreme left proponent, he will want to remove all guns from the United States and everyone needs to be banished, which in an ideal world I would like. I just believe it would form a black market. I believe that it would cause a lot of concern. I feel like you need to regulate them more. And in a way, I would try to be a little bit more moderate to prevent a circumstance that I think is unrealistic from coming to fruition.
Yeah, you've got to pick your battles.
At times, that's exactly it. I feel like at times it had to be picking battles and maybe going for the jugular on his opponent more so. That's something that in an ideal world I want to happen. But an ideal world is not what we're in. We're in a world where Donald Trump is now one of the leading candidates.
Yeah.
Heading for that, still had to shiver. So therefore, in a way, do you have to play the game in order to get yourself forward?
I think Bernie Sanders' his campaign's big failure, if I'm allowed to, not a dig, just, we'll wait to see it. It was not inspiring African Americans enough. I think if he had done that more, then he would have won the nomination, actually. But in terms of, I think, it is about picking your battles. It's about starting where people are. And that means, look, as I've said, the corporate media are always going to be biased. They're always going to attack you. But you've got to have an intelligent way of getting across your message. And you've got to start where the voters overall are not just your most enthusiastic supporters. Mm-hmm. And that means bread and butter issues, housing, jobs, health, education, living standards. What are your answers? Stick to them resolutely rather than going on about things which are more kind of, that maybe get some of your core supporters excited, but most people are like, not really interested in that, or I don't really want that at all. Can we talk about jobs again? Yeah.
I agree with what you have to say. Other tweet, which I thought was an interesting one, I was going to go through them. This is from Patrick Gunderson. Are there any countries other than the USA with which UK might form a special relationship?
Hi, Patrick. Another country that would form a special relationship with Britain. Well, a bit of a problem there, isn't it? Because at the moment we're kind of moving away out of relationship.
Yeah,
exactly.
No such thing as special relationship
we're not
anymore.
Moving towards people. We're not going, can we have some more best mates? We're saying to our mates at the moment, soz, but we're out of here. So that's problematic. I don't know really. I'd like, Canada. I think would be. I mean, there was a historical link.
Yeah.
If I was going to, pick governments at the moment. Justin Trudeau has lots of problems, but I'd swap Canada's problems for Britain's problems at the moment.
Absolutely.
If I had to choose.
Absolutely.
I was there.
I think most would agree with you.
I think, a place. I don't know really. Yeah. I think I'd like us to build strong relationships with European countries because the danger at the moment, we're going to destroy our relationships with European countries, and then we're screwed.
Yeah, left on our own.
Billy no mates. What do you call that in America now?
I don't know actually. I used to have Nigel no mates in Scotland.
Illiterates.
Yeah, very same. This is a good question actually from Oliver Nissen. Infighting aside, Labour still unpopular. Is the problem of the left or of liberalism generally?
Blimey. Well, we use liberalism differently in Britain. So in the United States it means left wing. It doesn't mean that in Britain. It means kind of centrist, bit wishy-washy, kind of thing altogether. Is it the problem with the... What does he mean? Or her? The left or liberal? What I think often it is, we've got... I keep saying we start where people are, so I've got to stop saying that. I think most people don't think about left or right, do they? I do, because I'm a sad politico. Most people don't think about left or right, apart from sad politicos. Most people, if they're in the workplace or in a bar, they're not talking about left wing or right wing. They're talking about issues to be addressed, told in a language they understand that resonates with their experiences. And I think that's where the left fails sometimes, because if you speak in a dogmatic way, most people just like, whoa. It's like that kind of weird guy in a local bar and you're kind of edging away from them. Gradually, never happens to me.
The only thing that I will say about in the United States is often the conservative values and political values will come into everyday conversations.
Yeah.
It's almost engraved into the fact that most teachings, when it comes to raising your kids, when it comes to going to what schools, like as we do see in the United Kingdom as well, it's often based on their political beliefs. So it is often, I feel, and more so in the United Kingdom, in the United States, is there's no middle ground. I feel like you have to pick a side, and that resonates whether it's political party, whether it's what's going on with police violence. Like there is no medium. There's no happy medium to kind of negotiate between. No middle ground. And I feel like it does go along with why people are consistently still raised with the thought that they have to choose early on. So I feel like that does come into a conversation more so than anything else. So that's why you'll get questions as to people will try to place blame. Is it on the left? Is it on the right? Rather than maybe there's some sort of problem with, in between. Maybe there's some issues that have to be addressed on both sides. And I think that in the United Kingdom, you perhaps it still is a prominent issue, but for instance, in a government that recently had a coalition, you still have the ability in some potential way to see a little bit of both sides. Whereas in the US, I think it's almost impossible. I think you have to.
I think it's quite polarised here now, more than it's been for a very long time.
Yeah.
Britain is now an extremely divided country.
Yeah.
So much so, we've got the sort of rhetoric actually you're used to in the United States, but we're not here, which is the idea that if you're an opponent, a political opponent, then you're unpatriotic.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous when you start doing that. So our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, attacked this kind of middle-class, liberal, metropolitan elite who have disdain for the patriotism of the working class. And it's kind of dangerous rhetoric. We've seen front pages today of the Daily Mail, the Express, the Daily Express, two, I'm afraid, mass circulation national newspapers, talking about how we need to silence opponents, as they put it, or they call us Bremonas, British Remainers, people who want us to stay in the European Union. We need to be silenced, that that there's a secret plot to stop the will of the British people, and that there's treachery. Dangerous rhetoric, demonising people for different views, and we are becoming very divided. And look, we did have recently in Britain, a member of Parliament, a Labour member of Parliament, was murdered by somebody who attacked her in the street, yelling that she was a traitor to Britain. So there are very dangerous people playing with fire when they start talking in these ways, because it legitimises fanatical and far right and fascist fringes. And so we've seen that, I think, in the United States, that kind of language for a long time, but we're seeing it imported in this country after Brexit in particular. And that kind of sense of the middle ground, I think, is imploded. Yeah. The centre, the old centre, is disappearing everywhere, all over the Western world at the moment. You've got new movements on the left and new movements of the populist xenophobic right. I think in the United States, though, what I find interesting, same in Britain to a degree, is so-called millennials are more likely to have progressive outlooks on economic and social issues. Yeah. I think there's a new generation that wants more social justice, stand up for minorities, so I think there's hope there. But in politics, obviously, you either want the rich to be taxed properly or you don't want them. You want workers to have more rights or you don't. You want various utilities to be run publicly or by people in the private sector for money. Yeah. I mean, there are obvious differences where you can't just say one, you can't say there's a middle ground there. Yeah. I have a politics which is based on building a society that puts people's needs and aspirations ahead of profit. So obviously that's a view which is in conflict with others. Yeah. So I don't necessarily agree you have to build consensus all the time. I do think on things like LGBT rights, all that kind of thing, you can on left and right. But on some issues, people just differ, don't they? Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a point that I want to go away from the tweets and come back to me really quick. Sorry for being a little bit selfish, but you talked about youth engagement is what we've seen, whether it be Brexit, the Scottish independence, whether it become the Democratic nomination for Bernie Sanders. The youth seems to be becoming more engaged in politics, but at the same time, confidence, which is growing consistently, battered down by, it seems to be, the older generation still seemingly getting their way. Older voters voting predominantly for a Brexit, it passes through. Older voters voting for a Scottish independence, a Scottish to remain in the UK, passes through. And most Hillary Clinton supporters, on average, a lot older than that of Bernie Sanders. So how do you continue to build on that momentum? How do you continue to build and push the message that there is a bright light at the end of the tunnel for those that are young and want to remain engaged in politics and want to continue to try and build for a better future? Well, do you know what? People often say, that's because young people are naive and left-wing and they'll be hardened by reality and become right-wing. But actually, in the 1980s, younger Americans voted for George W. Bush. Yeah. So not George W. Bush, George Bush. Senior, and for Reagan. In Britain in the 1983 election, Labour got crushed by the Conservatives, and people under the age of 25 actually voted for Margaret Thatcher. Sorry, I get nightmares. Sometimes I wake up screaming. But you get, now though, amongst the last general election, Labour had a huge lead amongst people 18 to 25, and do so today. Whilst older voters, and we have lived, thankfully, in an ageing society, are more likely to vote Conservative. But there is a new generation that is rising, which is growing in number, obviously, which has a different outlook on things, and that gives me a lot of hope. But it shouldn't be a generational conflict. That's poison. Yeah. We've already got low-paid people against unemployed people. We've got people, indigenous people against immigrants. We've got private sector workers, public sector workers. We don't need young versus old. I want to win over older people. I think older people who often still live in poverty, insecurity, have a lack of social care, lack of decent retirements. So we need to win over older people as part of that broader coalition. And I want younger people to take the lead there. I want them to break down those generational divisions, not to see older people as the enemy. You know, the bankers who plunge us into economic disaster, the tax dodgers, the poverty-paying bosses, they're the real enemy, not your grandpa.
Yeah.
So we need to build that coalition. But it does give me hope because young people now are more political than they've been for a long time, more engaged in these movements. We're not going to win everything all at once. But in America, the Bernie Sanders campaign has changed American politics.
Absolutely.
And that was young people who made that possible.
Yeah.
And young people should look at that and think, that's something we're going to build on. If we can win these concessions, even though we didn't get everything we wanted, that's something that will spur us on to keep fighting for a just America.
Here. I don't think I could find a better way to end it. I was looking for another tweet, but I think we still had some distasteful tweets coming in later. So none that are going to be worthy of reading out, unfortunately. Maybe next time when we do an Owen Jones Talks with TYT Part 2.
Yes.
You can look forward
Let's
to
do that.
more tweets. Maybe if you're coming to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
We actually will go to LA this time and not pretend I was taking you to LA and drive you around the corner.
I'd love that. Let's do that. Come on.
Absolutely. We're going to make it happen.
You should have put like this fake LA background.
Just like
Hollywood,
Hollywood,
and then it just falls
Hollywood
over.
sign.
Yeah.
That's what everyone thinks, but don't go to Hollywood Boulevard. It's a dump. Either way.
Oh, ouch.
It is true.
Angry tweets definitely coming in now.
Make sure to check out all of Owen's stuff. So your YouTube channel, fantastic. You just surpassed 80,000.
Yep, Owen
subscribers.
Jones Talks.
Congratulations
Thanks.
on that, and all your articles on The Guardian. You can check out there. Any more books coming out I should be aware of? Or is that
well, I'm writing
in the hiding?
I'm writing The Politics of Hope at the moment, mostly to cheer myself up. It's like therapy. I've not been given much material to work with at the moment, but I'm doing my best.
All right. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure.
Good
Thank
to
you
see
so
matey.
much
Good to see
for
you,
joining on, and make sure to stay tuned, TYT.